My presentation, of course, is entitled Good Muslims, Bad Muslims, and the Secret of the New York White Sauce. I had a fair amount of fun writing this paper, so just bear with me. Local public approval of New York City's Halal Guys food cart at West 53rd Street and 6th Avenue transcends racial, class, and religious boundaries. Muhammad Abu Elanin and two fellow Egyptian immigrants started their Midtown Manhattan halal street food selling business for Muslim cab drivers in 1990, making the complete switch. Can you hear me? Making the complete switch from the traditional New York hot dog in 1992. But it is post-September 11th, 2001, that the chicken, rice, and white sauce platter and gyro operation really attained culinary cult status. Mahmoud Mamdani, Charles Hirschkind, and Saba Mahmood identify U.S. perception of the dividing line between the good Muslim and the bad Muslim as one that separates moderate cultural Muslims from political radicals. But good or bad, Mamdani says, all Muslims are perceived as incapable of making culture, except at the beginning of creation as some extraordinary prophetic act. In this talk, I first interrogate halal street food in New York as first representative of harmless, static, good Muslim culture, perceived by the general American public as far removed from the specter of the political imposition of Sharia law. Second, I'll show that halal, as they call street meat, successfully carries the ethnic food burden of transforming the Muslims who make and sell it into New Yorkers, interpolating them and itself into discourses of American citizenship in even the political fraught locale of Ground Zero and the World Trade Center itself. New York City's street food carts were once most famous for hot dogs and sausages, and that's still what the tourists think. The locals know better. There are now about 125 licensed halal food carts in the city. Before the Egyptians, the street food trade was run by, in chronological order, the Germans, Italians, and then the Greeks. According to city census reports, between 1990 and 2005, the number of Egyptians, Bangladeshis, and Afghans declaring their occupation as street vendor surged from 69 to 563. Halal food carts run by primarily Egyptian immigrants have, through a combination of longevity, squatters' rights, good cheap food, and less kosher tactics, achieved total dominance of the New York City street food scene. The most famous halal food cart operation, the Halal Guys Chicken and Gyro, and that's their patented trademark in the corner there, was started in 1990 by three Egyptian immigrants, the aforementioned Abu Elanin from Cairo, Ahmed El Saka, and Abdel Basset El Sayed from Alexandria. The cart operated, that's it on the bottom there, or bottom left. The cart operated from mid-morning until 4 a.m. In 1992, the Halal Guys switched from selling hot dogs to meat and rice and wrap dishes to cater to New York's late-night Muslim cabbie population. As the founders say in one of their very many New York media interviews, on top there, hot dog is not a meal. We figured out that most of the cab drivers are Egyptian, Pakistani. They suffered too much from no halal. What is now known as the original cart was and still is located on West 53rd Street and 6th Avenue in Midtown. The Halal Guys franchise, which now includes 4 carts and since 2014, 2 brick-and-mortar restaurants, is characterized by its slogan, "We are different." You can see there. And its red on yellow logo plastered on carts, takeout bags, and employee shirts. While the city issues their vendor permits, cart location is not regulated, which has led to 25 years of daily halal cart scuffling over Midtown Manhattan street corners, culminating in at least 2 stabbings, 1 court case over cart logo trademark infringement, and somewhere between the New York Post, the New York Daily News, bemused customers, and angry rivals, the coining of the term halal mafia. As the New York Post reported in 2009, newcomers to the city's food cart wars say that when they stake a claim to a busy corner, they frequently get threatened by a loose-knit band of gyro-cooking thugs they call the halal mafia. When the threats don't work, the veteran vendors start dialing 311 and making health code violation complaints. As you can see here, The New York mainstream media, as well as foodie sites, follow the halal guys and its internecine cart wars and struggles over street corner dominance breathlessly. On the far left is actually the front page of the cover of this past Sunday's New York Post, February 15th. I think we've kind of reached either the apex or the nadir of punning, with intifuda. What's interesting in this case is the ease and confidence with which the cart owners trade, and the paper reports casual personal insults invoking Israel and Palestine, sort of on the bottom there. Mohammed Masad, the ironically Muslim, is reported as saying, "He said I am a terrorist. He says I bombed the Twin Towers. That's racist. To me, it's not about him being a Jew." His Jewish opponent Mordowitz says, "I thought I could bring peace to Midtown. I'm not an enemy, I'm a friend. They're trying to say that the Jews in Israel are pushing people out, so don't do it here." The fact that we could spend a long time on that exchange, but the fact that it approaches the level of banter says something about how the close proximity of 20 million culturally different people in New York City forces a kind of coexistence. Besides the intifuda, halal puns abound, and this is a selection of kind of the best and worst from the Post and from the Daily News. From the Post, we get "All Halal Breaks Loose," "Juicy Lawsuit," "Attack of the Gyromaniacs, Halal Heavies." These are all headlines. "Halal to pay over battling bros food carts," twofer there. "Falafel kerfuffle," "Fresh meat carts cut down to size in halal of a fix. It's just falafel." From the Daily News, "Halal good. Halal's well that ends well. Eatery owners beef versus vendors. Gyromania. New York, New York, it's a halal of a town." "Halal guys hit over Pete of the action." That one's trying really hard, but doesn't make it. "Peace in the Middle East," in the Middle Eastern food cart wars, that is. What I want to suggest here is that this is the humor of ownership and belonging. The Muslim halal cart guys are framed by the New York media and by their many satisfied local customers as no less than the narrative ideal of the genuine, hardworking New York immigrant. In New York City terms, that is a good Muslim. The term halal is naturalized as just the latest ethnic food word the city has added to its already vast gastronomic lexicon. In thinking about the ways in which varied cultural practices, as distinct but never completely removed from religious practices, produces Muslims in the US public sphere, there are at least three overlapping paradigms suggested by scholars. The first is, as noted, is Mamdani's dichotomy of the good and bad Muslim, where the creative makers, rather than the followers of culture, are the ones who escape the Orientalist characterization of Muslims as retrograde and barbaric. Mamdani says, "When I read of Islam in the papers these days, I often feel I am reading of museumized people. Our culture seems to have no history, no politics, and no debates. It seems to have petrified into a lifeless custom." He proposes the formulation culture talk, or the predilection to define cultures according to their presumed essential characteristics. Asad Abu Khalil calls one strain of this culture talk model theologocentrism, by which anti-Muslim scholars and politicians explain all political behaviors of Muslim and Arabs by reference to the Quran and its supposed incompatibility with objective human rights and human values. The second paradigm of cultural production of the American Muslim is Hirshkind Mahmoud's and Rashid Idyassin's model of a private-public sphere, where the privately religious and politically progressive Muslim who does not object to visible cultural assimilation in terms of food, clothing, secular education, and so on, is the contemporary Western ideal of Muslim. Halal food carts in New York, though, never purport to be divorced from Islamic culture and religion. As one of the Halal Guys founders says, they'll never serve alcohol, because even though, quote, "most of our customers aren't Muslims, we are. We have to respect our religion. The customer is to be respected, but is not always right. Halal street food is not assimilationist, but it does make allowances for time, place, and clientele." The third paradigm is one suggested by Louise Kankar and Sineina Mera, who posit that the intersection of criminalization and ideas about cultural citizenship produces what they call an ideological process of criminalization that leads to the exclusion of Arab and South Asian Muslim Americans from full national belonging, or what they call cultural citizenship. Halal street food production, I would suggest, sidesteps questions of criminality by cleverly disavowing ideology, assuming what one might call a gastronomic cultural citizenship of the belly, where democratic bodily hunger for sustenance is necessarily apolitical. Nowadays, as Yassin notes, the word halal has come to be part of the common vocabulary in Western Europe and in the US, though halal as a commercialized European and American public identity category is a relatively recent development. For many Muslims and non-Muslims in New York, halal has become a secular category of authenticity, evidence of what Yassin calls the cultural integration of Muslim religiosity in a secular context. There are something like 3 major periods in New York City's halal food history. The first follows the late 19th century and early 20th century migration of Syrians, Lebanese, and Palestinians to the Lower West Side of Manhattan, centering on Washington Street, which became known as Little Syria. The second period in New York's halal food history follows the largely under-researched migration of Bengali Muslim sailors employed by the British colonial maritime industry to various American port cities between the 1920s and the 1960s. In New York, these men settled in Harlem and married African American and Puerto Rican women, and then they did what immigrants do. They worked in and then opened up their own restaurants. The third era in New York's halal food history is, of course, that of our friends, the contemporary food cart kings of New York, the halal guys. As you can see on the far left of this map of Tribeca in Manhattan, the halal food cart in closest proximity to 2 sites of Islamic contention, the World Trade Center itself and the so-called Park 51 World Trade Center Mosque, is a one-man operation called the Halal Cart Guy Cart. No relation actually to the halal guys. Like the cart owners themselves, this Muslim Yelp reviewer has no compunction about courting controversy by saying in his Yelp review of that halal cart that he hangs out near the World Trade Center eating at halal carts and going to Friday Jummah prayers. Even on a site accessible to anyone on the web, the extent of naturalization of the category of halal is such that there is no reaction to his review beyond a majority of 5, towards the bottom, voting his review useful. In 2010, the American public became aware of a proposal by a Muslim property developer to turn Park 51, a mostly empty building owned by Con Edison and located about 2 blocks from the World Trade Center complex, into a 15-story tower with a mosque that would have had a Sufi imam, a 500-seat auditorium, and a pool. Its leaders say it will be modeled on the YMCA and Jewish Community Center in Manhattan. The project was scrapped following a national outcry from the likes of Newt Gingrich and Sarah Palin, the latter of whom urged, quote, peace-seeking Muslims to reject unnecessary provocation. In 2014, developers quietly and successfully proposed instead a 3-story Islamic museum and sanctuary space, designed by the architect Jean Nouvel and dedicated to exploring the faith of Islam and its arts and culture. And they were going to use the extra space to build a giant condo because it's New York. There has thus far been no national reaction to the new proposal. The key appears to have been shrinking the scale and calling the prayer area a sanctuary space instead of a mosque. Though they are both words associated with Muslims, halal and mosque clearly have different valences in American public discourse. Halal evokes the possibility and hope of a good cultural Muslim, whereas mosque implies the bad religious Muslim. As Robert Ji-Sung Koo points out in his study of Asian American food culture, matters of gastronomy are a matter for a nation's collective sense of self as much as they are for its sense of collective taste. Food is political. Witness the ongoing debates over the White House's hosting of Ramadan iftar dinners as a symbolic gesture. But in New York City, under the guise of cheap and tasty eats, halal food carts blend the religious and cultural so easily that the good private Muslim and the bad public Muslim might even coalesce into one human being again. The secret is literally in the sauce. In New York, halal food is not Muslim food. It is localized and naturalized as New York food, belonging to the city of American immigrants. The major local debate over halal food carts is not whether Muslims should sell their ethnic halal food on the American street corner. That such a thing is possible is a given, because the Germans, Italians, Greeks, and other immigrant groups already did the same thing. The big New York issue is the gourmand's question. What is the secret ingredient of the ubiquitous white sauce in which halal street vendors coat their chicken and rice bowls? As you can see on the left there, speculation abounds. My favorite is actually towards the end of the New York Times quote, "Mayo and silence." In December 2014, after opening its first brick and mortar restaurant, the halal guys switched from their traditional squeeze bottles, as you can see on the left there, to sauce packets, which came with an FDA mandated ingredient list. The secret, it seems, included soybean and/or canola oil, egg yolk, vinegar, water, salt, sugar, natural flavors, black pepper, disodium EDTA, and the preservatives xanthan gum and sodium benzoate. Fittingly, it seemed that the secret of the white sauce was the use of lemon juice as a condiment, as per traditional Arab cooking, hybridized with the eminently American concoction of mayonnaise. But was halal food in danger of becoming too American? Holding out hope of Oriental mystery, the food critic and halal cart obsessive Zach Brooks of the foodie site Midtown Lunch subsequently wrote, "But who knows what natural flavors really means?" Thank you.